and other precious metals. And so, of course, these wars often are portrayed as conflicts between individuals and ideologies, but at the heart of it, they're corporatized wars and commercialized wars. South Sudan separated in 2011. That is a story in itself, but I put that up there to highlight that the conflict truly for this country and the folks and the citizens of this country started in 2011. So they've really been in some form of conflict for the last 14 years. The military coup that overthrew a long-standing ruler, Omar al-Bashir, was in 2019. Again, a very important sort of highlight in their history. Again, tumultuous time for the people of Sudan. And then comes this recent conflict. And a lot of people have asked, and I don't think I have the time today to explain how at least we understood it when we went there, as to what the basis of this conflict is, but at a very high level, it's basically a civil war between two military factions. So this conflict started in April 2023, so we're basically just now crossed the 2-year anniversary of this conflict. And it is fought between the Rapid Support Forces, which is a paramilitary force that finds its stronghold in the Darfur region. So now, again, without pointing fingers, I'm going to tell you, you can imagine that the gold is there and the stronghold of the Rapid Support Forces is there. So now all of a sudden there's an international attention, and nobody, including Google, will deny that there's essentially a proxy war going on, and there's several international forces, including many of the Western countries, that have a vested interest in this war today. So you can call it a civil war, but it is a war being fought by many folks who have vested interests abroad. So the RSF, of course, has a lot of international support. And then the Sudanese Armed Forces is the main faction which was running the government prior to. So the Rapid Support Forces attacked the Sudanese Armed Forces and attacked Khartoum, and that's where this conflict started. Just to give you an idea, one more fact, fun fact, if you will. Darfur, if you put those 5 states together that I just pointed out on the left, just to give you an idea of the geographical size, Darfur region put together is the size of the country of France. Just the region of Darfur is the size of the country of France. So imagine that for a second. There's over 300 individual militias operating in Sudan. Now, of course, they're not all they're not all fighting amongst each other. Many of them are aligned either with the RSF or with the Sudanese Armed Forces, but it is no doubt, and we actually experienced that, as I will show you here in a few minutes in our slides, 300 different militias operating in this country. And then, of course, the impact of this war, approximately 20 million internally displaced people, and that, again, starts talking about the impact this war is having on the local citizenry. So this is a quote from the United Nations. This is the United Nations report, again, easily Google searchable. The United Nations and their humanitarian offices, OSHA specifically, say that this is the most devastating humanitarian crisis in the world today, and most likely in recent human history. And I hope that shocks you, because with all due respect, I don't remember the last time we talked about Sudan from this podium. And I don't remember the last time I went to a local masjid and I heard much about Sudan. So I hope that's the message that you take home today, that this isn't us saying this is the world body saying that this is the most devastating humanitarian crisis in modern human history. Moving forward, these are all pictures of our own. So I want to, again, disclaimer, as I had a disclaimer in the last presentation we did here from Gaza, all of these pictures you'll see, again, I apologize for them. These are all pictures either taken by my phone or Irfan's phone. So again, quick facts about Sudan, 30 million. Remember I told you 50 million people population prior to the war, almost 8 to 9 million have left the country. That leaves about 40 million. Of the 40 million, 30 million need assistance. Again, this is the United Nations Humanitarian Office quote and most recent report. So 75% of the population needs some form of assistance, whether it's healthcare assistance, whether it's clean water assistance, whether it's you know, food assistance, food insecurity. At some level or the other, they need some degree of help. Over 150,000 dead. Honestly, I've been seeing this number of 150,000 for several months now. I think they stopped counting. I honestly think it's well beyond this now. And then outbreaks of dengue, cholera, malaria, measles, and the list goes on and on. We personally, the irony is that the surgeon who was going to be hosting us in Madani, he himself had been inflicted with dengue and malaria the day before we got there. And as Irfan says, and I'm going to quote my Irfan here, he said, you know, up until that point, we only were being shot at and bombs were going off, and it really didn't scare us. But when we saw this brother, and I'll leave him nameless for HIPAA reasons, when we saw this surgeon doctor, and we had seen in his eyes what dengue and malaria had done to a healthy doctor, that's the first time both of us had a sense of fear in our entire trip. Because if any of you, and I see many doctors here, if any of you know what dengue and malaria how it can ravage your body. This man had joint pains, body aches. He was on constant medication. He literally for a few days we didn't think he was going to make it. So dengue, cholera, malaria, measles, outbreaks in the displaced refugee camps, rampant problem with zero healthcare access. The other major problem, and this really becomes very difficult to talk about, is for some odd reason this conflict has been the epicenter of rape. Women and young girls specifically are severely at risk in this conflict. And unfortunately, the reports are both sides are committing this heinous crime. Rape, abduction, disappearance of women, a major problem in this conflict as well. So I hope with those slides that gives you just a very high level of what Sudan is. Again, I could probably spend the rest of the hour and maybe a couple more hours, you know, sort of downloading on you what we learned in the course of the 10-day trip that we were there. Now I'll just show you some pictures. I'll run through these fairly quickly. Inshallah, if we have some time before Isha, we might even take some questions. So I'll walk you through kind of the journey that we had. We landed in Port Sudan. Port Sudan is the only functioning airport at this time in the country of Sudan. It sits on the east coast on the Red Sea of Sudan. And so we spent a day or two in Sudan because of some of the red tape and being able to travel internally, of course, in a conflict zone requires a lot of clearances, which we didn't have. So we stayed in the city of Port Sudan for a day or two, and so they took us around to different hospitals. This is a picture of a pediatric ward. This is an open-air hospital. I mean, by the way, this is their main children's hospital in the only city that hasn't been afflicted by conflict, Port Sudan, which has now become their de facto capital, right? Khartoum has been, as we said earlier, essentially massively afflicted by the war, so most of the government functions and functionaries have moved to Port Sudan. In that environment, this is the main pediatric teaching hospital. You can see how the beds are, and this is open air, by the way. And by the way, these people that you see in the bed, most cases, if you look closely, there are 2 children per bed, and these are the fortunate ones. They were telling us, and the brothers from SAPA, and brothers and sisters from SAPA, the Sudanese American Physician Association, run, and again, I can't highlight enough, and I can't emphasize enough the work they're doing in their own country. They are running the only pediatric intensive care unit in the country today, functioning pediatric intensive care unit in the country. If I asked you to guess, I think I would be embarrassed myself how many beds that unit has. 6 beds. 6 beds for the population of the country still remaining, and it is being run by SAPA and supported by SAPA. Anyways, this was a pediatric ward. One of the steps we had to take, of course, you always have to kind of shake hands when you get into these zones. This is to the left, myself and Irfan standing in front of the World Health Organization. On the right, this is us meeting the Minister of Health. And so as soon as we got all our hands shaken and got the red tape and the clearances, we started making our move. So we traveled from Port Sudan to Madani, otherwise also called Wad Madani. I know this map for some reason shows Manakil, but I truly did put in Madani. And this, I just left this up there to give you an idea of about how long takes, based on Google. Google doesn't know much about Sudan, just like the rest of us. And so this doesn't take 13 hours and 45 minutes. This takes 18 and 20 hours. It takes 18 and 20 hours, folks, because most of the roadway, first off, the roadway is a single-lane highway. In good times, it's a single-lane highway. Right now, that highway has been bombed in multiple locations. Essentially, all the bridges have been bombed along the highway. And then the other major reason why it takes much, much longer is, remember those 300 militias? In some places, we got stopped probably twice every 5 minutes, because you can pass between the domains, and I don't know what are the territories, if you will, of one militia to another within half a mile. And then they stop you, because each militia has its own checkpost on this freeway, on this highway, or on this road. So it took us about 18 hours of travel. As I said, there's only one functioning airport, so there's no option to travel by plane or any other way. And along the way, these are our pictures. So just so you know what's going on, these are the pictures that me and Irfan were sitting in the back of this car taking constantly. And I can't emphasize enough, I've never seen more destroyed vehicles in my life. So this is the decoration on the side of the street that you see in Sudan for 18 hours. For 18 hours, constant. It almost seems like this was a war of destruction of cars. And it just, at one point him and I were asking ourselves, it's going to take them a lifetime to just pick up the cars, because the vehicles have been destroyed, the infrastructure has been destroyed. As you pass through any city on your 18-hour journey, this is what the cities look like. Ghost towns. Ghost towns, brothers and sisters, ghost towns. The buildings are just marked with bullets, as you can see if you look closer. I can't even remember what city with this, maybe Atbara or maybe before Atbara, I can't remember exactly. After Atbara somewhere, because Atbara was at night.
The militia guys.
Yeah, the militia stopped, the militia stopped us in Atbara, and I think we were there at night. So this was somewhere else, but along the way, just to give you an idea. This is a video. I hope it plays. Yeah, please. I hope this video plays, and you can see, as this is just we're driving, you can see the destruction on the side of the streets here. This is the militia. This is myself sitting. This is Irfan's picture. And the militia, the average age of these militia folks is probably 14, 15-year-old boys standing on the side of the street, literally in some cases every mile. And they are all armed with some form of a machine gun. And here's the fact that just blew me away when I was told. Do you know that the entire continent of Africa does not have a gun-making company, gun manufacturing? And so when we roamed around in Sudan, every 16-year-old boy has a gun. So does that mean that there's any foreign involvement in these wars, or how does that look to you? It was mind-boggling to us how many times we had to be stopped, and it was almost at some point comical, because our driver obviously had been down this path before, so he would open the window, they would do this little dance and wave, and off we would go. Alhamdulillah, we didn't get too bothered by these folks. But these are some of the relics. This was actually the entry to the city of Madani, which is the city where we conducted our mission. So as you enter the city, and when you can only imagine after 18 hours of militia and bumpy roads and all the rest of it, when we finally got there, we were super excited, but we were welcomed by this. And this was actually right across from the hospital, right across from the hospital that we were working at. So this is what we felt like after about 4 days. This is where we stayed. We stayed at the National Center for Pediatric Surgery. This is where they put us up at night, but this is obviously not where we did our work. This is the hospital that we worked at. This is the SAPA, Sudanese American Physicians Association. MashaAllah, you'll hear this again and again. They are doing amazing work. They have taken over this hospital. This hospital was defunct, dead, lights were off. They have rehabilitated this hospital within days, actually, Actually, the night before we were to start working, they said, you know, we got there late at night, so they said, well, let's go show you this hospital. And they took us for a tour of this hospital. No lights, no running water, paint buckets everywhere. And they said, oh, you're going to work here tomorrow. You're going to do surgery here tomorrow. And I looked at Irfan, and Irfan looked at me and said, that's not happening. And the next morning, the brothers and sisters on the ground from Sapa had the operating rooms functioning, had this hospital up and running. And so this is us getting to the hospital. This is the hospital in Madani. The hospital had many challenges. I put this picture in place, as I said, no running water. So they would get trucks of water every night and pump water up into the tanks. And then, you know, of course, one day we ran out of water. And then I think on the last day, there was an attack on the local dam. The local dam was blown up by the RSF. So that day we also lost complete water. So for those that think that conflict is not happening there, conflict was happening there. The local dams are being blown up. Water is obviously a shortage. To the left is actually the generator. And in the bottom, those jerry cans you see, those are the fuel for the generator. And this just gives you an idea under what circumstances we were working. We were working with under generators with essentially no water in many cases. The operating room was upstairs. We were the only two doctors along with the resident doctors and the local doctors, but there was this hospital opened the day we got there, essentially, right? So the lights were turned on for this mission. And so they sort of advertised the fact that we were getting there, and within a few hours, the waiting area of this hospital was packed. So this is me looking down the stairs, and at all times, the lobby of that hospital looked exactly like this. To the point, by the second or third day, they had to hire extra security because of the overwhelming number of patients that had flooded this hospital because they were so desperate for healthcare access. They eventually had to set up tents outside in the yard of the hospital. Again, I want you to remember, I am the only orthopedic surgeon there, and Irfan's the only anesthesiologist there. This isn't a 100% functioning hospital. There's just two of us and all of these people. And the picture goes on. Every morning we'd come, there would be more people sitting in the hallways, more people sitting under those tents, more people flooding the streets. This is the street in front of the hospital. Or actually, is this the yard of the hospital? This is the yard of the hospital. And these are the people that every morning they have to get there and they have to get registered. And because obviously the logistics folks knew that we were only two people and we could only do so much work for that day, they would cut off the registration process every day. And so these people that didn't get registered that day would sleep overnight in the yard and wait to get registered the next day. And in some cases, they wouldn't get registered the next day. So they would wait one more day to just to get registered, not to see a doctor, just to get the registration done. So one of the first cases, and I'm sorry again if these are painfully gruesome, this was a 4-year-old young boy. I remember him very distinctly. He was one of the first kids that we saw. There was a lot of pediatric work, folks. That was the heartbreaking part of this. Much of what we saw was children that just neglected. And I don't know if any of you are orthopedic surgeons can look at an x-ray, but just to look at that x-ray, just to point out that that bone is pointed 90 degrees. Bent 90 degrees. This young boy's name was the same as mine. His name was Muhammad Umar. This is Muhammad Umar. He's 4 years old, and he has a broken leg. And he was deathly afraid of going back to the operating room. So Irfan and all of his, mashallah, subhanAllah, it's amazing to travel with somebody who has as much heart as this guy next to me does. Put him in his lap and walked him into the operating room like this. So this is how he went to, being carried by his anesthesiologist back to the operating room. I didn't have much, so all I could do was truly put a cast, what we call a spica cast on him, trying to realign this bone. Alhamdulillah, we did get better. I was talking to one of my orthopedic surgeon friends yesterday. He was asking me about Sudan, as does everybody nowadays, and I told him what I was doing. He said, oh, I don't do children's breaks anymore in my practice. I said, nor do I. But I know I can get it better looking than that. And so when you're in these circumstances, you do things that you're not usually doing, but you're the last option these people have. You're the only option these people have. I'm sort of glad that this picture cut off on the bottom. It looks like me and Irfan are contemplating something very serious, but what you really can't see is there's a child underneath us hanging with his 2 legs up in the air. This was a 7-day-old child with both of his femur bone, his thigh bones broken during birth. And for the lack of any better treatment, they literally tied his legs up in the air and created this makeshift swing-looking thing and just hung his legs up in the air. And so the parents and the family carried him in with this swing. He's literally hanging upside down. 7-day-old child stuck in this position, premature as well. So there's a lot of very painful pediatric cases to see. It just gets more and more painful. This is a 4-year-old? 4-year-old young girl. She came in with her mother. Last day. This is one of those cases that had been waiting for 3 or 4 days to get registered. Imagine a 4-year-old child, how patiently she was sitting. She had cancer of her leg. That x-ray on the right is a cancer of her shin bone. And the mom thought that we could do something about it. Oh.
That's how it started.
Yeah. SubhanAllah. So this young girl, mom was so certain that these doctors from America would be able to do something for her. She had kept her without eating because she thought she was going to have surgery that day. It's what we call in the medical world NPO. She was NPO that morning. And when I looked at her, the first thing I did is I pulled some candy out of my pocket and I gave it to her. And the mom literally started crying. Because just the fact that I was giving her candy meant she's not getting anything done here today. And cancer treatment for children in any part of the world is very expensive. Here, it's non-existent. We didn't even know where to send this young girl. More than likely, if this continues, by the way, this had been continuing, so when we talked to her, she'd been dealing with this problem for several months. And more...
The MRI was before war.
Yeah, the MRI, Irfan just reminded me that the MRI that was done on this child's leg was 2 years prior to, but because of the war, everything had to stop. All her medical treatment stopped. And she had been living with this cancer for 2 years. Most likely, she's going to lose her limb. And that too, and even in modern countries, most likely this is a non-salvageable limb at this point in time. So imagine us having to tell this child and the mother that, there's not much you can do there. So at the heart of it, there was basically 3 types of injuries that we saw. One was, of course, acute, sort of gunshot wounds, projectile injuries, bomb explosive injuries. This was a young man. He was shot with his foot. They dragged him, threw him in the back seat of a car. They pulled him out of wherever they pulled him out of, threw him in the back seat of the car. And the reason I remember this is because he was shot in the bottom of his foot. So this bullet went in the bottom of his foot and shattered 3 of his bones. And I kept asking this guy, like, how did the bullet go through what were you doing that your foot was up in the air? And he said, they threw me in the back of the car and then shot me, and it so happened that the bullet hit my foot. So it hit his foot, we pulled out the bullet. He's got multiple broken bones in his foot. So there's this type of injury. This was another young man, very young. Again, another blast injury to his entire forearm. He showed up, he essentially had lost most of the tissue around his forearm. So essentially he had his lower arm and his upper arm and then some gaping holes. Somebody had attempted to sort of salvage him, had put a pin or a rod from his upper arm down, so he was stuck. Again, no bone, no soft tissue, he's gonna lose his arm. So there was a segment of what we did was this type of stuff, which was blast injuries, explosive injuries. Then the second segment was an attempt where people had previously tried to get repair, but because, as Irfan just pointed out, because of the war, because of the high risk of infection, because of the collapse of the healthcare system, there was intermission and they weren't properly cared for. So we saw hardware failures. This is a plate and screws that has fallen apart. You can see the screws are broken. They're out of the bone. This patient has a broken leg and has been walking around like this with metal sticking out of his leg. So just, that this part of the metal is literally sticking out of his leg for several years now because since the war, these people have not had access to anybody. Again, another case, a young man shot in his hip. Somebody tried to save his hip, total collapse, with hardware present, plates and screws and things like that. Again, these were things, I bring these x-rays because it was very painful for me as an orthopedic surgeon to be able to tell these people there's nothing I can do for you. There's absolutely nothing I can do for you. These are complex cases and there's no options for them. This is an elderly gentleman. He told us before he went to sleep that he broke his hip 2 weeks ago, 2.5 weeks ago? And so we put him to sleep. We had the opportunity to fix people's hips, so we tried to fix his hip, and this guy's hip was just stuck, jammed. And I was just struggling and scar tissue and all kinds of stuff. And then I come out of and these are his 3 sons or relatives, and I come out and then, my broken Arabic and some translation, I asked him, how long has your father's hip been broken? He says, 2.5 years. Not 2.5 weeks, 2.5 years. And so, this is the story there. People are walking around on broken legs for 2.5 years because they have not had access to care. Circumstances were difficult. I mean, as you can tell, this is not an ideal operating room situation. This gentleman, Irfan, can you tell us what you had there for anesthesia?
Yeah, so like we said, that the day we went in was the first day when they opened up, and there were like anesthesia machines and there were some anesthesia technicians. There was all the anesthesiologists have left Madani or Al Jazeera state after the war. So there was these anesthesia technicians who were like brand new. And I asked him, I said, is this the ventilator? Does it work? She said, yeah, it works. And we turned it on and it looked like it was working. And then I asked her, I said, do we have the IV medications to put them to sleep? And she said, yeah, we have it. So, and then I asked her if you have the anesthetic gas to put in the machine. She said, yeah, we have that too. So most of the monitors, when we turned on, basically the only thing which was working was the pulse ox, where you can check the oxygen and the blood pressure. Rest of it was not working. And there was one, so we were mostly doing them with the spinal, where we put a needle in the back and we kind of paralyze them from waist down so that we don't have to rely on monitors that much. But there was one case where we had to give general anesthesia. So we gave general anesthesia, put the patient to sleep, put the breathing tube in, and then the ventilator just stopped working. She said, yeah, it's been like that, so I don't think it's working now. I said, okay. So I said, do we have the IV medication? She said, yes, we have it. So I said, where is it? She said, at the other hospital. I said, we thought it was here. She said, no, I can send someone on tuk-tuk to get the medication. I said, okay. So I said, what about the anesthetic medication to put the gas to put in the anesthesia machine? She said, yeah, we have it. So I said, can we put it in because it's empty? She said, yeah, that's at the other hospital too. When we send the guy, he brings everything. So, but alhamdulillah, whether it's Sudan or whether it's Gaza, I think these guys do well with the will of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. There is nothing that me or Umar do or anyone else do. It's just the will of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that, like everyone else, these guys just survive. And our first day when we had done, I think, 8 surgeries, all of them had spinal and they were like paralyzed from waist down. And they had told us that they're going to be staying overnight. So at 8 o'clock, the lights went out and the water went out. So they said, well, these guys all have to go home. I said, well, these guys are all paralyzed. They said, yeah, that's fine. The family's going to take them on the shoulder. They have to go. So, and that's what exactly happened, because the family said, we don't have water and electricity at home, and you don't have water or electricity here, so it doesn't make a difference. We might as well take them home. And they all went home, and somehow, alhamdulillah, they did well. So they all do well just with the will of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, not with us.
So like I said, there was 3 types of cases. One was those explosive and projectile and bullets. The other one was these neglected injuries, 2.5-year-old injuries that we dealt with. Some of this we could actually help. And then the third was, again, very painful category in my books. This gentleman that you see laying here on the left, this is a guy, we were leaving the hospital one night, and I saw a man laying in a bed under a tree. And I told her, I said, this guy, in the dark, I could try to make out. And, we went and walked over. This man is a 43-year-old. He's an auto mechanic. He was sitting under a car, and the car collapsed. And it broke his back, and it paralyzed him from his waist down. That happened a month prior to us seeing. And he in this bed was being carried around by his family members, and they brought him to see us. Of course, we don't do spine surgery, didn't have availability of spine surgery. But what was amazing, and again, not to get too technical on you, but he actually had some intact sensation. He was complaining of burning in his legs. So typically when you're paralyzed, you feel nothing, you can't move anything. He couldn't move anything, but he had feeling. So in the middle of this evening, late evening, 10 o'clock at night, me and Irfan just went into hyper mode, because in any other country, that's hours. In a developed country like our own, you have hours to try to save this guy's leg from being paralyzed from waist down. It had been a month, but he still had sensation, and we had nothing to do with it.
They had traveled 8 hours on tuk-tuk from Atpar.
Yeah, they had traveled 8 hours in a rickshaw to come see us. So anyways, alhamdulillah, yarhamakallah, we tried to make arrangements for this gentleman. In Port Sudan, there was a spine surgeon who offered his services, and through the good offices of SAPA, again, we've been able to help this gentleman. And a few days ago, he had his spine surgery, and we actually got a picture today of him sitting up in a chair having a cigarette. So, alhamdulillah, this was a happy ending. This young child on the right, as I told you earlier, we were staying at a pediatric hospital, and we came down one morning going to the other hospital, which is where we worked, and I see this little baby crying and the mother holding on. There's no food there. There's no food. We had at least one 24-hour period, maybe two, where we didn't have any food either. And you know, you feel bad in those circumstances asking your host, because nobody's eating. In fact, I'll tell you right now, I had protein bars that I'd taken from here, and in the morning we used to be shuttled to this other hospital, and sometimes, you know, we'd go fairly quickly, and so I'd just throw a couple protein bars in my bag, and when I'd take them out over there, the doctors, local doctors would look at me trying to eat. I could never eat that protein bar by myself. I would break it up into 4, 6, 8 pieces and distribute it to everybody. I'm telling you about doctors. So imagine what's going on with the rest of the population. Anyways, these children, when they see any food, whether it's hot water, cooking, mama's cooking, what have you, they pull on it. This little child pulled on mama's tea or whatever the hot thing was, scalded himself, and it was just flies and what have you, everything around sitting there. That pediatric ward, we discovered kind of towards the end, was just one of the most heartbreaking places. Everybody had a story. And one of the things we realized is food insecurity was a major, major issue. So we would go down there, and sometimes we wouldn't find children to give candy, because we were both carrying suitcases of candy. That we've learned from Gaza that candy is a universal sign of love. And so we take candy with us whenever we go on these missions. You can't go wrong with candy. Both adults and children love candy. So we took candy, and I was trying to look for some kids to give candy, and then one of our local hosts said, you know, Dr. Bernie, you probably want to give the candy to the mothers. I said, well, mothers, I'm looking for children to make them happy. I want to give them candy. She said, the mothers are who need the candy. They don't produce any breast milk because they have no nutrition. If you give them candy, they'll produce breast milk, and they will be able to feed those children. So from that on, I started giving candy to the mothers, not the children. As you can see, me and Irfan used to go downstairs every morning before we left for the hospital and start distributing candies to the mothers of these newborn babies. We're coming to the end here, folks. I know it's almost Isha time. This is what Sudan probably was. This is not the Sudan that we got to see much of. Beautiful country. In the background and the picture on the left, you see the Nile River. On our way back out of Madani, back to Port Sudan, they told us, hey, you know, Khartoum has just been liberated about a week to 10 days ago. Do you want to go see it? We said, of course we want to see it. I think they figured out by then that there's these two Pakistani guys aren't afraid of things as much as, initially I think they thought we were, you know, Caucasian. But anyways, so they decided they were comfortable taking us to Khartoum. They took us to Khartoum, and they put us up in a what was it, a guest house? It was their main office on the roof. Of course, Khartoum doesn't have electricity. Khartoum also doesn't have power, water, or anything. So the rooftop was beautiful. We got to sleep there at night, right very close to the Nile. From the top of the roof, this is a picture from the rooftop. We could see the Nile. It was beautiful. We got to spend the night but neither one of us slept. Don't be fooled by these happy, smiles on our face. This was the night that the RSF decided they didn't want us there. This was a all night long fireworks session of everything, RPGs. They lit up the sky around us. We were so tired by this. This is like day 9 of our trip, and and we were so exhausted. I know Irfan opened his eyes one time, looked at me. I was awake pretty much through the night, and he said, "Do you think we should go inside?" I said, "It is what it is at this point." So, I say that because I want to emphasize to you that none of those areas are free and clear of conflict just yet. Whether they've been liberated or not liberated, there's constant conflict going on. We saw it with our own eyes. Exhaustion is a real thing. This is a surgeon's lounge at the hospital. There's nothing there. And when you get tired enough, you fall asleep. I did want to end it on a good note. We were taken to a, what is these restaurants called where they serve camel meat? You know the name, Hashi or something like that. So they took us to a place where they serve camel meat. They cooked camel meat for us. I didn't think I could eat very much. Neither one of us ate very much that day because these are the pictures that we're left with. These are our patients. These aren't pictures off the internet, folks. This is what the average patient looks like. So when they do offer you food, you think about that a couple times before you eat. And certainly, hopefully the kids in this audience, before you let food go to waste on your plates, think about what's happening to the people around the world. These are patients of our own that we were taking care of. Last picture. We made a lot of good relationships. This is the beauty of these mission trips. You go there for the cause of serving humanity, but you come out of there having gained more, both in terms of relationships and just your own experience. Every one of these people had a story. These are all healthcare workers that helped us along in the project, and we're ever so grateful to them for allowing this to happen. This is the last slide. This is a QR code for our friends in the SAPA organization. As I said earlier, this project could not have happened. I am ever so grateful for their support there. They're doing amazing work for their countrymen. Please, if this message has resonated with you at any level, look up this organization. I think, Brother Naji, you guys will have a booth out in the rotunda after Isha Salah tonight. Ask about them. Again, the take-home message from this is really meant to be, please, 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 let this be a wake-up call for everybody. Don't forget our brothers and sisters in Sudan. 150,000 of them are dead. That's 3 times the figure potentially of Gaza, not to compare and contrast. 400,000 today. I was right when I earlier said that they stopped counting at 150. So please, don't forget about them. Keep them in your prayers. Support this organization. And thank you very much for your attention. I don't know if you want to add anything. Jazakallah khair. We have 5 minutes. I don't know if Brother Abbas, if anybody has any burning questions, we'll hang around after Salah as well, inshallah.
Jazakumullah khair.